Okay, land-based empires. Let's begin. 3.1 expansion. Uh, how and why is the reason. So go to this section here. You should be able to download it, make a copy of it, and then start typing. Okay. So let's begin with the very top part. Um, I can explain the impact of increased use of gunpowder and cannons to establish and grow trade, armed trade. Okay, so it should be armed trade. So again, gunpowder, cannons, armed trade on those three blanks. So we got gunpowder, cannons, armed trade. So let's go over each one of these guys and what were the causes. Let's start with the Russian Empire. Expansion, how and why. They expanded using gunpowder, and the reason it was for natural resources, including fur, and to control trade. Now, the next one is East Asia or the Qin Empire. How and why? Oh, well, they used gunpowders like everyone else, but they had defensive reasons. They did not want to allow Russian expansion and did not want a resurgence from the Mongols. They wanted to control the Mongols. And in part to kind of show off that they were still the Middle Kingdom. Okay. Next is the Safavids. They expanded using gunpowder and to control the main section of the Silk Road. So once again, it's for armed trade. Now the Ottomans, they want to expand using gunpowder once again to control the Silk Road and the Mediterranean Sea. Remember, this is why they take over Constantinople and rename it, call it Istanbul. And they also use gunpowder weapons. Now, lastly, is the Mughals, and they expand. Why do they expand? They use gunpowder. They want to control part of the Silk Road as well as the Indian Ocean trade. Indian Ocean trade. All right. So now letter C. Political and religious disputes led to rivalries and conflicts between states. So we got political and religious disputes. So now let's go over each one of them specifically. Again, political and religious disputes led to rivalries and conflicts between states. So let's go over the Ottoman versus the Safavid um, dispute. The Ottoman versus Safavids, um, mainly it's the Ottomans were Sunni. They believe that anyone could be the leader or caliph of Islam, whereas the Safavids are Shiites and they believe that only Muhammad's family bloodline can lead Islamic the Islamic faith. So that's their main dispute. But the other dispute is control over the Silk Road. Okay, so now we got the Mughal. I hope you can't hear my baby in the background. You know, like he's going crazy. Mughal and Safavid war. So the Mughals versus Safavids, they want to again control over the land routes. And you have Akbar, who, unlike the Shiites of the Safavids that are very intolerant, Akbar is a very tolerant leader in the Mughal Empire. And that actually leads to the rise of Sikhism. It grows in popularity. Sikhism is a blend of Hinduism and Islam. It was started by Guru Nanak. He said something like, there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, only God. So he was trying to like blend both religions together and want to end conflict. So again, in part, it was kind of a difference between the two um, states, one being very tolerant, one being intolerant, but it was mainly control over the Silk Roads. You need to know Sikhism and what that is. All right, now one that's kind of on the side has nothing to do with something to do with the time, but nothing to do with the actual gunpowder empires, is Songhai in Morocco. Now, Songhai it took over what used to be Mali in West Africa, and Morocco is north. Um, right now, this is a Muslim versus Muslim war. Now, Askia the Great grows older. Askia the Great is the Songhai leader in West Africa, and his sons kind of overthrow him, and they start kind of a civil war between themselves, and that gives Morocco a chance to try and control the Silk Road. Morocco invades. Now, another reason that they want, not the Silk Road, the trans-Saharan trade of gold. Another reason that they want to go down and invade is because they had just gotten into a war with Portugal, and Portugal kind of depleted their treasury. It was mainly because they had to pay ransom for some of their folks. So they said, oh, okay, well, let's go down and try and get some of those gold mines. And they went down and invaded. And while Songhai is having this kind of civil war, they're easy to invade. Also, Songhai has no gunpowder weapons. So that kind of leads to the decline of West African empires. Morocco wins, but they're unable to rule for a very long time. But trade in the trans-Saharan trade kind of declines uh, because of that, and also the combination that European trade now begins with the Americas. So that kind of leads to quite a bit of poverty there in West Africa, and an easy invasion by Europeans later on when we start talking about imperialism. All right, so administration is 3.2, consolidating power and legitimizing rule. So there's two sections in this graphic organizing. The first one is consolidating power through administrative elites, and the other one, the other people that help them consolidate power, is the paid professionals. And then there's legitimizing their rule through religious ideas, art, and monumental architecture. So let's explain this piece. 3.2, the recruitment and use of military professionals, as well as the development of bureaucratic elite, became more common among rulers who wanted to maintain centralized control over their population and their resources. Rulers continued to use religious ideas, art, and monumental architecture to legitimize their rule. Rulers used tribute, tax farming, and tax collection to generate revenue to forward state power and expansion. So in order to continue to expand, they kind of came up with some creative taxing methods. So once again, they use military professionals and bureaucratic elite to maintain power, and they use religious ideas, art, and monumental architecture to legitimize their rule, and they use tribute, tax farming, and tax collection to generate revenue to continue to expand and show off their power. So let's use this graphic organizer to see specifically the bureaucratic leaders or elites and the military professionals for each one, the religious ideas and monumental architecture, and tax collecting methods. Remember, the first one is bureaucratic elite. How do you hold on to power? Second one, how do you legitimize power? The third one is taxing to continue to expand. So let's go over the Ottomans first, and Mehmed the second. Okay, so one of the ways that they use to uh, to have a bureaucratic elite is the Devonshire system. I didn't write it down. I should have, but go back to your book if you don't know how to spell it. Um, they in this system they go to Christian villages and take their children, right? And those children then become janissaries. The janissaries serve two purposes. They're the military elite, the military professionals, and the bureaucratic elite. They also have bureaucratic power. As they get older and become better soldiers, they gain positions in the administrative side of the government. Right? Now, in order for them to legitimize their rule, they have these monuments. Now, this monument was not created by the Ottoman Empire, but it was the Hagia Sophia. It was the largest Christian church, and it becomes the largest mosque. So here you see it inside. It is now the largest mosque, right? Now, for taxing, they use a very innovative idea called tax farming. And what they do is they give some people the right to go out and get the taxes on behalf of the government. So they go collect the taxes, and these guys keep some of the revenue and then give the rest to the government. It gives them an incentive to make sure that they do collect the taxes. So again, tax farming. So for the Ottomans, you have Janissaries that are both the bureaucratic elite and the military professionals. Religious ideas and monumental architecture is the Hagia Sophia, and tax collecting is tax farming. For the Mughals, let's talk about the Mughals. They use the Samandars. Those guys are their bureaucratic elite, and they are in charge of collecting taxes and administering the different pieces of the government or places in the government. So Samandars, those are the bureaucratic elite. The most commonly known place that they use, the Mughals, to legitimize their rule is this one, is the Taj Mahal. Again, monumental architecture. And they also use tax farming. All right, so we got the Mughals. I didn't give you any military professionals because you're not supposed to know like all of them, but that's the Mughals. Now the Ming Dynasty, the Ming and the Qing dynasties. Okay, I'm just going to go over the Qing. For the Ming Dynasty, you can kind of go to your notes, um, but I'm just going through the Qing Dynasty. Actually, you can follow along. The Ming and the Qing both used the civil service exam and scholar officials to run their government. Those are their bureaucratic elite for both scholar officials using the civil service exam and their meritocracy. Right? Now, to legitimize their rule, they use kind of a religious idea, and that's the idea of the mandate from heaven. Again, both the Ming and Qin use the idea of mandate from heaven, right? And both use the idea of Confucianist rituals. In this ritual, you see that the emperor has to kind of, oh no, this is, I'm sorry, this is the civil service exam. I'm sorry, civil service exam. Monumental architecture. There you go. Monumental architecture. This is the um, Forbidden City, started by or created by the Ming Dynasty and also used by the Qin Dynasty to legitimize their rule. And here we go. Now, another thing that they use to legitimize their rule is this piece of art. These were called imperial portraits. Okay, these were hung around the palace. Imperial portraits. Um, and again, I didn't put a picture, but you should have wrote down that another is religious ideas, and that is Confucianist rituals that they both use in order to legitimize their rule. And lastly, tax collection. The main thing about their tax collecting is that they used silver. Now you may say, "Hey, Gonzalez, that's not a Ming or Qing silver piece." No, it's not. They did have their own silver pieces. This is called a piece of 8. This is actually a Spanish silver coin, and that became the international coin that everybody would take. Okay, and we'll talk further about those guys in Unit 4. So again, collecting in silver for both the Ming and the Qing. So everything that I said kind of applies to both, so you can kind of put them together. So Ming and Qing. Now, Japan, 1600 to 1868. So remember, you have to go through bureaucratic elites, religious ideas or monumental architecture, and then tax collecting. So for Japan, Tokugawa Japan, it actually encompasses from 1600 to 1868. And there's some remnants of medieval Japan, right? And I'll show you where Japan is as opposed to this is Europe, this is Japan, this is China, India, right? So medieval Japan, you see provinces that they split up their empire into provinces. So they use provinces to kind of rule over. Now, their bureaucratic elite is the daimyo. These guys are in charge of hiring samurai and protecting the island, right, or the islands. The main guy in charge is the shogun. He's a military professional. He's also a military leader. The emperor is only a figurehead. Emperor is only a figurehead. So you could put these two guys as the bureaucratic elite. Now, their paid soldiers are these guys, the samurai. These are the paid soldiers for Japan. Now, as far as tax collecting, they're medieval. So we're not going to put anything in tax collecting. They do use monumental art and architecture to legitimize their rule. This is Edo Castle as their monumental architecture, Edo Castle. So now we're going over to France and King Louis, both Louis, but we're going to mainly focus on Louis the 14th, right? So the King of France, the Sun King, oh, the 15th, I'm sorry, Louis the 16th, VI 16, Louis the 16th. Now his bureaucratic elite is two groups, a group called the Estates General that represents the first the first, second, and third estates. So this is kind of like a parliament that meets. Now he doesn't like them because he doesn't like the fact that they get kind of a vote over him. So he creates the intendants. The intendants are administrators appointed by him, and he uses it to kind of weaken the nobles and the Estates General. So these are appointees by Louis. Okay, so I didn't put down any military professionals. I mean, but you can just use these guys, the intendants and the Estates General. They are used to kind of run the government. All right, this is a picture of the intendants. Now, to legitimize rule, one of the most famous places that you're supposed to know is the Palace of Versailles. So people are in awe when they go into the Palace of Versailles. Right? And no tax collecting. So now let's go over to England. So in England, remember, we got bureaucratic elite, military professionals, monumental art and religious ideas to legitimize rule, and taxing. Okay, so let's go to England. Now this is going to be interesting, right? Because in England, you have something that happened in 1200, right? I know it's before 1450, but you have to know this. They create, in order to rule the government, they create something called the Parliament. Now, the Parliament came or was created because of the Magna Carta. That was created again in 1215. The Magna Carta is a letter, a document that was created by the elites, by the landed aristocracy, and they forced King John to sign it. Otherwise, there was going to be a civil war, and King John kind of had to give some rights, some basic rights, not to everyone, but to the elite. So I guess the way you could apply it to this particular graphic organizer is, again, the creation of Parliament, and as a group that helped the king run the government. Right? Now, here's Parliament. Now, why that's important is because that idea of Parliament gets taken over by the English into the colonies and then is used by the colonists in the United States later on as it had its revolution and created its own government, right? Then comes a guy by the name of King James, and he says, no. I believe in this idea of the divine right of kings. So he gets rid of the Parliament And here's a quote by him. He says that the state of monarchy is the supreme thing on earth. As to dispute what God may do as blasphemy, so it is treason in subjects to dispute what the king may do. A good king will frame his actions according to law, yet he is not bound thereof, but of his own good will. So, in essence, he's saying that to question the king is kind of like questioning God because he's given this right by God. And that a good king then uses his own conscience and only his own conscience to rule well. Right? So he believes in the right of kings. He gets a lot of pushback. He gets a lot of pushback. So that this is how I want you to write it down. Bureaucratically, parliament and justices of the peace that are also used. They use the idea of divine right of kings. Also, write it down as far as France. They also use the idea of divine right of kings. But this idea in England is checked by the Magna Carta. Remember that. The Magna Carta checks this whole idea of divine right. All right, there is that document that gets brought up later on in history. They also use tax farming. Okay, so now let's move on over to Russia. Peter the Great versus Ivan the Terrible. So in Russia, the military professionals are the Streltsky, and these guys again use gunpowder weapons, as you see the muskets, right? And the landed elite used to run the government of the boyars. Now the boyars kind of getting into a lot of issues with Ivan the Terrible, and they want to kind of get rid of him. And that's why he uses these guys. On top of using the Strelsky, he uses the Oprichnika, or his secret police, to kind of control people in his government, especially to control the boyars. And again, you see here the picture I showed you earlier in class. Boyars trying to get rid of Ivan the Terrible. All right. Now, in order to legitimize his rule, his monumental art and architecture is this one, St. Basil's Cathedral. Right? And as far as taxing, he taxes the peasants, uses tribute like everyone else. And Peter the Great also used forced labor, if you remember the other lecture, forced labor to uh, create his navy and to make St. Petersburg. So forced labor, tribute, and regular old taxing of peasants. All right, so now we got Mesoamerica. Again, this is one of those, these guys don't have gunpowder, but they're land-based empires. And we're going to skip this section. We're going to go into legitimizing rule through monumental architecture and religious ideas, and then tax collecting. So, monumental architecture is Templo Mayor. It no longer exists. This is the dig site in Mexico City. The Spanish destroyed the Templo Mayor and built a church on it, and now the church has been taken down and they're digging. But this is an artist's rendition of what it might have looked like. Now, this is monumental architecture, but they also used religious ideas, or the idea that the gods had given them this divine right to the king, and that they needed to continue to sacrifice people to continue to rule. So they both used the idea of divine right as well as this monumental architecture to legitimize their rule. Right? Now they do have military professionals, but I'm not going to get into who they were and the Jaguar cult and all that stuff. But they use this military to collect tribute. The Aztecs were well known for conquering a lot of people. They had the best empire, military empire at the time. This is a kind of how they documented what they got, the tribute that they got from certain areas. And as you can see, the tribute includes luxury goods as well as food. And I told you guys before, it also included people to sacrifice. All right. So now for the last section, um, now explain the continuity and change of various belief systems. Now, I didn't put the top part, so you're just going to have to listen, okay? So it says explain continuity and change within various belief systems during the period of 1450 to 1750. The Protestant Reformation marked a break with existing Christian traditions, and both Protestant and Catholic reformations contributed to the growth of Christianity. Political rivalries between the Ottoman and Safavid empires intensified the split between Sunni and Shiite Muslims. And letter C, Sikhism developed in South Asia in a context of interactions between Hindus and Muslims. All right, so let me say it one more time. The Protestant Reformation marked a break with existing traditions, in both Protestant and Catholic reformations contributed to the growth of Christianity. Political rivalries between the Ottoman and Safavid empires intensified the split between Sunni and Shiite Muslims. Sikhism developed in South Asia in the context of interactions between Hinduism and Islam. All right, so that takes us into the Protestant Reformation, the causes, effects, and shared results. So let's go over first the causes. So we're going over this section first, the causes. What caused the Protestant Reformation? It was a Protestant Reformation, protest and reform. What were they protesting and what did they want to reform? Indulgences. The Catholic Church would sell indulgences. If you wanted to commit a sin, you just go to the priest, give him some money, right? Or, if you wanted to be forgiven for a sin you didn't want to commit, but you did, so you go pay the priest. So that's the main reason. If you want to remember anything, just remember indulgences, right? Another reason was the Gutenberg press. The Gutenberg press allowed for all of these ideas to kind of spread. Okay, so again, here you have a Catholic priest collecting indulgences. All right, come on, folks. You want to commit some sins? You go ahead. Just pay me. And here you have Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the Catholic Church door. And he wants to debate. He wants to talk about the different corruptions, different things that he believes the church is not doing right, and people don't want to debate him. So he begins what's called the Protestant Reformation. So here is the Protestant Reformation and the effects. All right. So some of the effects is the rise of Lutheranism, Calvinism, and the Anglican Church. So all these Protestant churches came up, and the power of the Catholic Church began to decline. So another effect was increased literacy. Increased literacy, especially of women. So let's review the effect again. I hope you can see this: the rise of the Lutheran Church, the Calvinist Church, the Anglican Church, the Huguenots, and increased literacy. Now, how did the Catholic Church react? Well, with the Counter-Reformation, right? Counter-Reformation. And they were losing control of the land. We go back here, they're losing, especially in this area here. So they kind of react to that, right? So one of the first effects is the Council of Trent. In the Council of Trent, they say we're condemning all Protestants, they're heretics. They say that only the Catholic Church can interpret the Bible. You cannot interpret it on your own. And they do kind of enact some reforms as far as the indulgences and all that kind of stuff, right? So they also reinstitute the Inquisition, right? That's where the Catholic Church will try to go find some heretics, and there's a lot of torture involved. The priests were not the ones torturing. Here, see them here. They're just watching, but other people would do the torturing, and they kind of like pretend, oh, you shouldn't do that, but then, they kind of allowed it. And this is another effect: the rise of the Jesuit priests. These guys, their job was to spread Catholicism and fight against the spread of Protestantism. Right? So again, the effects: the Inquisition, the Jesuits, and the Council of Trent. Effects: the Inquisition, Jesuits, and the Council of Trent. So let me go over that once again. Causes: corruption of the Catholic Church, including indulgences, Gutenberg Press. Effects: Calvinism, Lutheranism, the Anglican Church, the Huguenots, increased literacy, especially for women. Right? For the Catholic Reformation, what caused the Catholic Reformation? Well, the Protestant Reformation caused it, and the fact that they were losing land. And one effect was the Inquisition, Council of Trent, and Jesuit priests. So now let's go over this piece. The shared results. The shared results were war, the diffusion of Christianity all over, famine and disease, and the separation of church and state. So let's go over that again. The diffusion of Christianity. So Christianity diffuses. Remember, this is also the time of exploration. So Christians come across, Protestants come to North America, and Catholics come to South America. The Portuguese Catholics go around and spread Christianity in Africa. Protestants and Catholics spread Christianity all over Asia and South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. It also leads to the wars of religion. So wars between the different states that are Protestant and Catholic. And it leads to the separation of church and state. So once again, the diffusion of Christianity, wars, and separation of church and state. Now, other challenges to the church. Now go to the bottom section. This is science versus religion. So first we're going to talk about science, and then we're going to talk about religion. So reason versus faith is what I'm asking you to think about. So we got religion versus science. So religion, they say that, the things that the things we know about the world, we know them out of faith. And everything that you should know about the world is in the Bible. Religion is also used to legitimize the power of the rulers. So in that sense, religion has a lot of power over people and over the rulers, especially the Catholic Church. In comes science, and a guy by the name of Sir Francis Bacon, and he says, hey, I got this idea from the Greeks about empiricism, and maybe instead of believing what the Bible says, we should use our own senses, and we should use the scientific method. What is empiricism? Empiricism is using your senses to figure out what's going on with the world. All right? And he puts it all down in some books. All right? Again, he's most well known for empiricism, using the senses. And that idea doesn't come from Bacon. It actually comes from the Greeks. You see here Plato and Aristotle. And Plato says that you learn from your head, from making sense of things in your head. Whereas Aristotle says, no, you learn from observation and your senses. Either way, neither one of them talk about religion being the main focus of how you should learn. You use your senses and then you make sense of the world. So you use reason, and empiricism to make sense of the world. And his scientific method, we still use it today. I know you know this scientific method from your science class, right? And then there's Galileo. He comes up with an idea of the geocentric versus heliocentric theories, right? And that's the idea that at first they believed that the earth was the center of the universe and that God made us and that's this is the world. And he comes up with this idea. And again, it's not just him by himself, it is the ideas of um, um, Dar ar Islam and all those ideas that came across through the Silk Road, as well as other scientists and the Greeks. He puts all of that together to come up with this theory. Now, the Inquisition kind of gets a hold of him. By that time, he's an old man. So actually, it took them very, very long to kind of bring him in for the Inquisition. It took about 16 years. So they told him to stop. He continued to write and he published his book. Then 16 years later, after he had published his first book, they told him, hey, man, this is not right. A lot of people believe that he was going to be poisoned or that he was going to be tortured. Actually, he wasn't. And in fact, he was just threatened, but he was so old that he was just told, "Hey, you're going under house arrest, but you need to just say that this stuff is heresy." And he kind of said, "All right, it's heresy," just so they could kind of leave him alone. He was too old to torture, so they kind of left him alone. All right, so that is it. You should study. Go through this and study.